A war fought across the stars come here to Earth for its final chapter, a conflict tens of thousands of years in the making, but the line between good and evil, life and death, success and failure blurs when the only chance for survival is to put our faith in corporate-sponsored superheroes. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of WildCats, the animated series. WildCats is offering our viewers a limited time offer of $100 off your subscription. Click the link in the description to get started. I know a lot about the history of cartoons, action figures, and pop culture, but I don't know the first thing about wine. WildCats, on the other hand, they've done the research. I can trust them to select from the best wines all over the world, personalized for me and my palate. WildCats believes that anybody can experience the joy of wine. They have a quick 7-question quiz that matches you to the flavors you'll like best. Over 100 varieties sourced from nearly a dozen countries delivered to your front door. The bottles move, so you don't have to. WildCats is more than just convenience, it's a partnership. The older I get, the more I want to try new and different foods and drinks. It can be hard to break out of the comfortable routine of the day-to-day experience. Buy the same food, drink the same drinks. You don't have to know whether the red or the white pairs with pasta or steak. WildCats will take care of that for you with all the facts provided on the individual wine file cards. WildCats is offering our viewers a limited time offer of $100 off your subscription. That is the best offer they have ever had. Click the link in the description to get started, and thank you again to WildCats. WildCats is an animated series that originally ran 13 episodes in the US from October of 1994 to January of 1995. It was the first Image Comics title to make the leap to animation, riding an unprecedented wave of popularity based mostly on potential. 10,000 years ago, 2 alien starships crashed here on Earth. One ship contained the last of the Daemonites, an evil race who once ruled the galaxy. The other ship contained a group of cherubim, noble warriors who defeated the Daemonites and brought peace to the galaxy. The cherubim managed to assimilate into the human race while the Daemonites began their war of covert conquest. Over the centuries, the cherubim lost contact with their living computer named Void. 2 years ago, Jacob Marlowe, owner of the Halo Corporation, discovered Void. Void told him about the threat the Daemonites posed to both our world and the entire universe. Marlowe immediately started assembling the cherubim and their descendants, a super android named Spartan, the marksman Grifter, the warrior Zealot, the telepath Voodoo, the mighty Maul, and newest recruit Warblade. He built a wild covert action team to save the world, a team called the WildCats. Jim Lee was one of a handful of comic book artists working at Marvel in the late 80s and early 90s whose visual style and character designs were so popular, the entire industry bent to their aesthetic. Lee's run on Marvel's X-Men set sales records and Guinness Book of World Records. Fed up with Marvel's corporate operations, their disdain for revenue sharing and creator rights, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, Eric Larson, Jim Valentino, and Whilce Portacio walked out, right past the DC Comics offices, and in 1992 formed their own publisher called Image Comics. Image Comics allowed each of the participating members to share the load with respect to operating the imprint, as well as the monkey's paw burden of complete ownership and creative freedom over their books. No one else to blame when things were late. And things were late. Each creator continued in stride with new characters that played to their creative strengths, heavily influenced by characters and concepts they made popular at Marvel. The first 4 titles to ship from Image Comics were Rob Liefeld's Youngblood, Eric Larson's The Savage Dragon, Todd McFarlane's Spawn, and Jim Lee's WildCats.
WildCats was actually a mishmash of a bunch of characters I created when I was a kid growing up reading comics. A friend of mine, childhood friend of mine, Brandon Choi, and I used to create comics at the kitchen table when we were like 10, 11, 12 years old. And over the years, we had different variations of these same characters. And so WildCats really is an amalgamation of all these different characters we created as kids.
Over the years, they had different variations of those characters that eventually evolved into the characters they used in the creation of WildCats. Furthermore, some of them are modifications of characters that were also used during Lee's time at Marvel. For example, at one point his character Maul was called Tusk due to the giant tusks on his back. But then Lee used that name for the creation of the character Tusk at Marvel and had to come up with something else when it was time to use Maul for Marvel, for Image. WildCats led to an entire creator-owned universe, quickly reaching out into the pages of new series in 1993 like Stormwatch and Gen 13, properties that he attempted to take into other media through his own company founded to turn his comic success into multimedia success. Animation was a natural step for WildCats considering the popularity of the X-Men animated series already airing on Fox Kids and superhero cartoons in general. Since 1992, Lee's designs for the X-Men had been served to kids on Saturday mornings, bringing a whole new generation of kids to Marvel. WildCats was picked up by prolific Canadian animation studio Nelvana, who were looking to get into the comic book craze themselves. Nelvana had a long history of children's entertainment with shows based on Strawberry Shortcake, The Care Bears, Star Wars Droids and Ewoks, Madballs, and My Pet Monster. Fresh off a season of Beetlejuice, they produced animated series for 3 properties with comic book roots: Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, and WildCats. WildCats launched in 1993 alongside Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Skeleton Warriors as part of a new CBS block of kids television called the CBS Action Zone.
When I heard that Nelvana wanted to make a cartoon based on my comic book, WildCats, it was, I had mixed feelings because one, the comic book is a little darker than your normal Saturday morning fare. But two, it's an awesome thing to have a cartoon based on something you create, something that will literally reach millions of kids. And ironically, the cartoon reached more kids than the comic book did.
WildCats was developed for television by animation veterans Bob Forward and David Wise. Forward had written and developed shows like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Brave Star, Cops, Captain Planet, Exo Squad, and Tattooed Teenage Alien Fighters from Beverly Hills. David Wise could trace his portfolio all the way back to Star Trek the Animated Series in the 70s. He wrote for shows like Wonder Woman, Buck Rogers, The Smurfs, Mighty Orbots, Transformers. He developed the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon and wrote 72 episodes.
Goldie's team, the WildCats. What they lack in skill, they make up for.
You're in training as of right now. Put that out.
With nerve.
Your mama said you ugly. Hey!
And how did your folks let you get like this?
He probably ate his folks.
You make this point and every girl in the free world will want you.
Goldie Hawn tackles the impossible.
Are you sure I'm the right person for this job?
WildCats, rated R. Starts Friday, February 14th at a theater near you.
According to Lee, he himself was very involved in the creative direction of the cartoon and hoped that fans would understand that a lot of changes had to be made to the comic book in order to make it a more marketable product for toys and a Saturday morning cartoon in 1993.
Going into it, I knew that this was a whole different kind of, product, I guess. It's a whole different kind of experience. I mean, the cartoons are aimed at 6 to 8-year-olds. The comic books are aimed for an older audience. How could you directly port something that's suitable for an 18-year-old to something that's for a kid that's 6 or 7 years old? So right off the bat, we knew that the things we were going to change, and that's something that you're going to do at the beginning. Otherwise, why even pitch your idea as a cartoon? I mean, why set yourself up for that kind of heartache and frustration, really?
For instance, in the comic, Voodoo is employed as an exotic dancer prior to her rescue/recruitment by the WildCats. For the cartoon, she was changed to an orphan who isn't employed as an exotic dancer before she is rescued/recruited by the WildCats. It allowed the production to sidestep the more mature aspects of her comic book origin, but retain her sense of being somewhat lost and innocent. Lee met with storyboard artists, he made revisions, redrew shots, he approved the licensing, the packaging, he helped with the casting. The series was his version of his creation filtered for a younger audience, something that just a few years earlier at Marvel he wouldn't have had any input into. The roster for the animated series mirrored the original roster from the comics. Spartan was played by Rod Wilson, Colin O'Meara voiced Grifter, Halo Enterprises CEO Jacob Marlowe was played by Sean McCann, and Fire Skull villain Hellspawn was played by Maurice Dean Wint. WildCats got an original theme song composed by Jerry Mosby with vocals by Canadian pop singer Cherie Geacock. Despite a wealth of television experience and the talented creators involved, WildCats only lasted a single season of 13 episodes, a standard number of episodes for a weekly animated series on network television. WildCats did survive on cable, getting added to the USA Network as part of their USA Action Extreme Team block that ran from 1995 to 1996. WildCats followed the standard operating procedure from the 80s carried into the 90s. If you're targeting a cartoon at 6 to 8-year-olds, you better have a toy line to go with it. Like their Action Zone partners Ninja Turtles and Skeleton Warriors, WildCats were backed by a full line of action figures from Playmates Toys. The toy line was co-branded with art from the Image comics. Other than Jacob Marlowe, the entire team was available from Spartan to Void. Villains as well with Hellspawn, Pike, and Slag. You could pair Grifter with his bullet bike or go big with 10-inch versions of Spartan, Grifter, and Maul. WildCats were featured in comics beyond the regular ongoing Image series. CBS released an Action Zone one-shot which included all 3 series, WildCats, Ninja Turtles, and Skeleton Warriors. Jim Lee's art is featured on the cover. Wildstorm released their own one-shot, WildCats the Animated Series Issue 0, with art featuring WildCats bursting out of the TV back to the pages of comics. In 1995, Playmates Interactive released WildCats for the Super Nintendo, a side-scrolling beat-em-up in the style of like 90 other games released in 1995. Players get to take on the powers of Spartan, Warblade, and Maul as you punch, laser, and slice your way through hundreds of goons, robots, and daemonites to square off with Hellspawn. If you missed WildCats the first time around, you can still watch it today. Funimation released the entire series on DVD in 2005. As of this video, it's available on Amazon Prime and Tubi, or head over to the Retro Rerun channel on YouTube for that and other classics like Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, and TNT. WildCats wasn't renewed for a second season, but Lee himself didn't miss a beat. Things were moving fast, and he had a lot of irons in the fire at the time. He was constantly creating new characters, new comics, new ideas, managing new artists and writers. Before he knew it, the animated series and the toy line had come and gone, but there were always new projects to dedicate his time and creative efforts to, a grind that ultimately came to a head in 1998 when Lee left Image Comics and sold Wildstorm, including WildCats, to DC. Lee wanted to focus on his family and get back to drawing comics. Wildstorm was technically part of the DC universe while remaining independent with respect to the creation of their comics. 12 years later, DC closed the Wildstorm offices. However, WildCats characters continued to make appearances in various DC comics, including their own solo titles in the years that followed. As of 2022, the WildCats are no longer a covert action teams. They have officially been rebooted and rebranded as a Crisis Aversion Tactical Squad. After 30 years, the S finally earns its own period. Or not. It's not in the final logo. WildCats was the first Image title to venture into animation, but not the last. 1995 saw the end of WildCats and the beginning of the Savage Dragon animated series, which lasted twice as long. 2 years later, Todd McFarlane struck a deal with HBO to produce a Spawn animated series that once again pushed back against traditional thinking, reinventing the marketplace, giving McFarlane the same kind of creative freedom on television that he had achieved in comics. McFarlane was able to implement the model of cartoons paired with toys, but directed at a much older age group. With more money in their pockets and the ability to make their own choices about how much violence, drug use, and sexual situations they wanted in their cartoons.
Sexual.
McFarlane manifested the dream that all of the Image founders set out to achieve back in 1992 when they left Marvel. Still independent, still in control, today he sits at the top of a vast empire churning out millions of dollars in sales for licensed merchandise and merchandise featuring his original creation, Spawn. But that was just one path to the top. Jim Lee has a pretty big chair himself as well. Since 2020, he's been the publisher and chief creative officer of DC Comics. He's the guy that gives the orders to legendary superheroes like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, as well as his own WildCats.
Baby.
Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, if you'd like early access to the videos ad-free as well as behind-the-scenes features, sneak peeks at upcoming projects, and exclusive monthly podcast about the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy. And let us know in the comments down below if you watched WildCats back in the day or if you're just finding out about this now. I bought WildCats from day one when Image launched, but have to be honest, until today I didn't really know what it was about. I read it, but I don't remember reading it. True to form, I have much better memories of skipping college classes to go to Toys R Us with my friend Rich to buy the WildCats action figures. Max, if you're watching, I'm talking about a completely different Rich that you don't know. Not your dad. He's a very responsible man who never skipped classes.
God.